Hey guys, Zom Fox here. And with the announcement that the Memphis Express are coming back in the new USFL, it is that time again to look back at the original Memphis Express. So yes, this is a brief history of the original Memphis Express. Now, as for the team itself, the Memphis food manager, known as Logan Young, was awarded an expansion franchise for Memphis on July 17th, 1983, but due to hiring a native and former college head coach and Pepper John Rogers is the head coach and signing a lease to play in the Liberty Bowl Memorial Stadium. He ended up discovering that most of his assets were tied up in a trust fund that he couldn't actually access. So he had to take on limited partners and ended up selling controlled interest to cotton magnate William Donovan, but he did remain the team president. Despite White's play, however, the Showboats finished fourth in the Southern Division and missed the playoffs. Like the rest of the division, they were left far behind by the Birmingham Stallions and Tampa Bay Bandits. However, like most of USFL's other Southern teams, they were a hit at the box office indeed. They were one of the few teams whose crowds actually grew as the season progressed. That is naturally a very good thing. And naturally, when it's talking about White's play, that's Reggie White, of course, which we'll get to a bit more later. Now, the Showboats broke through in 1985, finishing fourth in the East and earning a playoff berth. They should have went to Denver's Mile High Stadium to face the Gold, but due to the Gold's local support vanishing thanks to the USFL announcing that it was moving to the fall, then the next year, ABC Sports did not want to show off a half-empty stadium, so it forced Harry Usher to give Memphis the home field advantage in the first round. Since the Showboats have been among the league's best attendance leaders again, the Showboats ended up ponying them 48-7 before losing to the Oakland Invaders 28-19 in the semifinals. The Showboats did represent a very serious attempt and form to be a good professional football organization in a place like Memphis, and had a realistic chance of being a viable business in the overall management of the USFL had been more realistic and financially sound. Just like the World Football League's Memphis Southmen before them, the Showboats appeared to be on more solid footing than the league as a whole. The Showboats' attendance figures made Donovan a supporter of the USFL's move to fall, although Memphis was only a medium-sized market. While Memphis proper had 650,000 people, the surrounding suburbs and rural areas are not much larger than the city itself. He overall believed his team's popularity would have made it very attractive to the NFL if the event of a merger. After the USFL's antitrust lawsuit failed, the Showboats threw their support behind Charlie Finley's proposal to convince the CFL to expand into the U.S. market. The CFL rejected the plans, bringing the Showboats to an end. The Showboats did come from, the 1948 expansion nationally, just in case you guys didn't catch that, as they were part of the eight teams that came in that year. Now, as for their legacy and stuff like that, despite the failure of the USFL, the success of the Showboats was noticed by the NFL, indicating a viable market in Tennessee. As in 97, the Houston Oilers franchise would move to Nashville, though they did play their first season in Memphis before going to Nashville and being renamed the Titans. And then as well as Donovan emerged as an investor in the proposed Memphis Hound Dogs franchise that entered the NFL's 93 expansion sweepstakes, though they ended up losing to the Panthers and Jaguars, but Rogers and general manager Steve Earhart would later emerge with the Memphis Mad Dogs, a Canadian Football League franchise that played one season in 95. He would also manage the Memphis Maniacs of the XFL, Earhart, like the old XFL. And then in pop culture, just because that was funny, in the SpongeBob episode Band Geeks from Season 2, the band led by Squidward Tentacles plays at the Bubble Bowl, during which clips of a Showboats game versus the Bandits at Liberty Bowl Memorial Stadium in Memphis on May 25th, 1984 are shown. Classic episode, cool event that it definitely did happen. Now, as for some of the hard numbers, in terms of attendance in 84, their first season, they definitely were above league average by over 5,000, as they ended up with 27,599 fans per game, which only ranked them 10th, so they weren't in the top half of the league. But due to the fact that the Blitz and Federals basically made that average go down a lot, they were overall just a below average franchise. But the growing that was mentioned before was true, because in 85 they were 5th in the league, getting 30,948 fans per game, as they were one of the few teams that actually went up in the average. That's due to the fact that when the league announced they were moving to the fall, it was before this season, but they wouldn't actually go to fall to the next year. So a lot of the teams that had NFL teams in their market, and even some other teams like the Jacksonville Bulls went down, but the Memphis Showboats, they went up. And then last, in terms of their single season leaders of all time, Tim Spencer had the most rushing yards in the season in 85 with 789. Greg Moser had the most receiving yards at 1143 in 85. And Mike Kelly had the most passing yards in 85 with 2128, which is pretty sad, but it's okay. Then naturally, they finished fourth in the Southern Division in their first year, missed the playoffs, going 7-11. Then they rebounded to go the exact opposite, 11-7. Were third in the conference, and then won the quarterfinal against Denver and lost semis against Oakland. Now, let's talk about the players and their legacies. In terms of their single season leaders, Tim Spencer, their running back that led the team in rushing, ended up finishing as the third leading rusher in the entire history of the USFL. He overall played in a couple of years as he played with the Blitz and Wranglers, which is the same team, weird thing, and then the Showboats, and then he ended up going to the NFL with the Chargers, who had draft rights for a few years. Injuries eventually did derail his career, but he did get 1,700 rushing yards in the NFL. Not really a huge star, but definitely was a very big success in the USFL sense. Then as for Mike Kelly, he played with the Bandits the first year of the league, and then he went to the Showboats for a couple of years. He would end up playing one more year at all with just the Chargers, though he really only played a couple of games, though he did have one really solid game with 300 yards, because pretty much all his yards were in that one game. And then he would basically retire, though he would come out of retirement literally like another 7 years later to play as the backup for the Mad Dogs that were previously mentioned. Now, lastly, when you get to Greg Moser, he only was a USFL player. He never played in any other league, just the USFL. Played with the LA Express, Gamblers, and the Showboats. He got better naturally each year as he went from 47 yards to 685 to 1145. So, overall, one of the better success stories, for sure, of that. And then, before we go on to guys who are all USFL members and stuff like that, in terms of a notable player was Lex Luger. He is, if you don't know, a famous wrestler who is borderline Hall of Famer, but due to a lot of stuff off the ring, he's not in. But, to put it simply, he ended up playing with the Alouettes first few years. Then was a practice squad member of the Packers, then went to the Bandits and the Showboats in the USFL, and then the Jacksonville Bulls in 85, as well as the Showboats. And then after that, he would go to wrestling. He became a huge success, mainly in the WCW, the World Championship Wrestling, a big competitor to the WWF/WWE. He was overall a very big success in those, it's mainly WCW, but was still a very, famous wrestler. And then back to the players that, were players. We have Barney Bussey starting off our all USFL selections. He was an 85 Sporting News All-Star for the safety position. He played 2 years with the Showboats from 84 and 85, as he was a first-round pick that year. He would then go on to play 10 years in the NFL with the Bengals and Buccaneers. He overall garnered over 350 tackles in the NFL, as well as a decent 10 interceptions in his NFL career. Not a star, but he definitely did show that he had talent, and he ended up playing 10 years in the NFL, which that's pretty good. Derek Crawford was both on the All-Star and All-League teams in 84 for kick returner. He was very, very good at his job at returning. Those 2 years between the USFL, mainly his kick returns were where it was at, is that year where he was an all-star. He had over 1,200 kick return yards. Punt return yards, his second year, he had over 150. And he had over 1,000 receiving yards. Is basically that year, you had two guys who were really good as, quarterback playing, stuff like that. But in terms of his career, after the Showboats, he'd play a year with the San Francisco 49ers. Really didn't do much there, but after that he'd go to the Calgary Stampeders and Birmingham Barracudas in the CFL. He'd actually end up winning a Grey Cup and did have over 3,000 receiving and return yards there. So a very decent success. And then we go on to the guys who are on the USFL sites, all USFL team, all time. Mossy Cade is the first one. I feel like he's kind of made the list as a joke because Cade off the field was a huge problem. He had a bad sexual assault charge that eventually cost him his entire NFL career. He played 1 year with the USFL, where he did have 2 interceptions to the Showboats. Then he played 2 years with the Packers. So, yeah, kind of whack. But then we go to Tyrone McGriff, who we've talked about before a while back, who's a second team guard, tied with Buddy Adiolette. He ended up coming from the Steelers, where he played a couple of years in the NFL. Then he played with the Panthers 2 years, and then the Showboats after the Panthers, kind of had to fold, kind of. He was an all-rookie team member in the NFL, and in the USFL, he was on the Sporting News All-USFL team in 83. He played a lot of games overall. Very solid guard. And next, we have Gizmo Williams. Gizmo Williams, I talked about him a while ago, I believe, as he is debatably the all-time leader in yards, if you count just professional football, but though I'm pretty sure he's second all-time technically. He's got a ton of kickoff return yards. Basically, think of like Devin Hester's dominance in the return category and all of his accolades and stuff like that, except CFL. That's basically Gizmo Williams. Second team, special teams player, kick returner. He was very solid as well. He had 700 yards as a kick returner and 250 as a punt returner in the USFL for 1 year. As after the Showboats, he basically played exclusively in the CFL except for one little time, whereas with the Eagles in the NFL. He ended up winning the Grey Cup twice. He was a three-time he was actually a five-time All-Star. He was an All-Star 91, 2, 3, 4, and 87. Then he was a West All-Star in 87, 88, 91 through 94, and 97. He was also in the Edmonton Eskimos Wall of Honor. He is definitely one of the best CFL players of all time, so a very solid player from the Memphis Express. And heading on to the first team, the first guy we have is John Corker, who we've talked about before as well, as he was another guy that came from the Panthers. He was originally with the Oilers for a few years in the NFL. Then he went to the Panthers for 2 years and then the Showboats. He would then go on to play for the Green Bay Packers and then became a Arena Football League legend. He is considered one of the greatest Arena Football League players ever. In 2006, he was ranked at 19th as the best Arena Football League players ever. And then after a few more years, he ended up climbing the rankings and ended up being at 14th in 2012. He's in the AFL Hall of Fame, which is mainly an online thing. He's on the 10th anniversary team of the league. He was a very, very solid player, a lineman of the year in that league, an all-arena a couple times. And in the USFL, he was an all-USFL player multiple times. He was a very, very solid player in that league. Great guy, great player. And then the last player we have is a guy that I would hope everyone watching this has heard of, Reggie White. Reggie White, if you count USFL stats, is the all-time sack leader. He has 198 in the NFL alone, and not to mention he had another 23.5 in the NFL, so that clearly surpasses Bruce Smith's 200. He played 2 years for the Showboats, then he go on to become an Eagles and Packers legend, and then become a trivia question when he played 1 year at the Panthers. He was on both the Sporting News team and the All-League team in 85. He was first team on the USFL sites. He was a College Football Hall of Famer and a Pro Football Hall of Famer. His accolades, as you can see right there, it's just a lot. 2-time All-Decade player. Yeah, 2-time, that's insane. A 3-time NFC Defensive Player of the Year. He's on the 75th and 100th anniversary team. He's in the Eagles Hall of Fame. He has his jersey retired by the Packers and Eagles. And for those of you who don't know, your jersey being retired in football is so insane because there's it's about like over 50 players, about 52, 53, 52-man rosters in the NFL. So to have your jersey retired in football is a huge deal, and there's very few guys that have two, and he's one of them. He's got the records for most consecutive seasons with 10 sacks, leading the league in sacks. He's tied for that. Consecutive seasons leading the league in sacks, as I said, and being a leading league in sacks, which is also tied. And he was a multi-time All-Pro, literally 13 total All-Pros, 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, a Super Bowl champ, just an extraordinary player. So overall, that's it for the brief history of the original Memphis Express. Now, let me know if you guys want me to already do the other teams. I'm kind of thinking I'm just going to wait because it seems that the USFL might be, expanding slowly but surely. And I think it would be cool to have those done when the new teams come out. But that's it. For those of you who like this kind of content, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. Check the playlist that I have, all the other ones if you haven't seen them already for the 8 teams that played in the USFL 2022. Make sure to subscribe. And as always, have a great night.